Welcome, folks. My name is Lucas Patterson, and this presentation is being done as my first presentation slash broadcast for PowerPoint for a college project, so which is pretty cool. You guys get to witness that. Hopefully, I don't screw up too bad. Anyway, my article for my week 3 presentation was titled "Listening to the Globe" by Ethan Zuckerman, and basically the premise for this article is how globalization, technology, and things of that nature are making it really, really easy for us to connect uh, with other cultures around the world, but there are still unique challenges and problems that we come across, and most of it has to do with language. And hopefully, this project slash presentation will be enlightening for a few of you. Hopefully, I'll give some possible solutions to the problem or point out the significance of these problems, and maybe we can come up with a good discussion on it afterwards. But here we go. Listening to the globe. Basically, what's happening is we're connecting more and more via common languages. But many cultures and countries themselves remain in the dark, and the bigger players just keep playing the bigger game. In an increasingly global environment, humans are connecting with different cultures like never before. It's unprecedented. Advancement in technology, social media, global industrial business scales, international education, and culture immersion are increasing at alarming rates. There are many good things associated with globalization, but people also agree that perhaps some unique challenges are being presented to us in the process, specifically around cultural change, language, and group identity. And history reveals to us that this isn't the first time cultures have changed. Our lost due to the spread of other cultures and practices. In fact, we could argue that cultures have spread quicker in the last 20 years than they have in centuries. In short, his presentation on listening to the globe, Zuckerman takes us on a journey into massive global communication patterns. He goes on to show how easily it can be misunderstood or to misunderstand others, usually via language. Some countries get along very well with each other, for instance, the United States and the United Kingdom or Great Britain, and others are just, well, there. For instance, there's not a lot of communication between the United States and a country in the southern part of Africa, or there's not a lot of communication between the United States and Siberia. Those are just small examples. However, Ethan Zuckerman does mention hypothetical communication bridges that are being built all the time. For example, globalization lays the infrastructure for us, and technology is a catalyst. But we need to actually have people to start crossing them, and language is a great starting point. Some of you could be asking, what do you mean everyone's connected all over the globe? While that is true, as our global infrastructure grows, things get lost in the expansion. Languages die, group cultures fade away, and more dominant cultures take their place. Some aren't even in the fight to begin with. Zuckerman proposes that the bridges into these other cultures are untapped. For example, when was the last time you saw what was going on in Madagascar? How long has it been since we've seen news out of there? It's a great question, and many people are asking why. Zuckerman is, for example. Smaller and poorer countries like these remain rather untouched by globalization. The infrastructure is laid, but there are problems, whether it's poor government structure, lack of industry, lack of technology, etc. It's easy to see that not much news comes out of countries like that because we don't have means of extracting it. And before we get into global languages and culture, we need to understand a little bit about globalization. And globalization is defined as worldwide integration and development. And it also has many pros and cons, which we could debate on an entire topic. But for the sake of this argument, we're going to look at the pros And I'm going off the assumption that as college students, we all have a basic understanding of what globalization is. Globalization, for example, helps developing economies. Because of that, it helps businesses break into new markets. It allows for countries that normally wouldn't have any business with one another, well, connect in commonality and allow for exchanges of information. And perhaps the most important pro of globalization is that it's helped people become socially accepting of different cultures, and that's one of its goals. If globalization had anything to say, it would tell you that communication between countries should be rising and not falling. However, the truth may be a little more complicated, and we need to get technical to see that. Technology does play a role in language and behavioral patterns. It's no secret that social media is our vehicle for most things modern. Zuckerman reports that more and more people are getting all forms of news on social media sites. In fact, up to 60% of Facebook users get their news from Facebook alone, which is a little traumatizing, to be honest. For example, individually specific social media platforms like Facebook make it harder to break into different language groups. If my primary language is French, chances are I'm going to have mostly French speaking friends. Facebook's interface is going to be in French, and there's little room for language integration unless my secondary language is English, which brings us to the next point. And it's something that I took away from the article here. It's become largely apparent that English is sweeping the globe. In fact, some facts have been brought up in this presentation that I think are quite alarming. First of all, over 50% of all websites are in English. The next closest one is Russian at 6.4%. And according to a New York Times article published in 2007, 25% of the global population can communicate in some form or level of English. And here we go. Perhaps the most important point of all via language in the English language is that English is the global language of business. Sadly, money governs mostly everything. Globalization has seen to that. With our global infrastructure growing at rapid rates, so does the dominance of the English language. Business is at the forefront of all things globalization, and that's no secret. Therefore, one binding element of globalized countries is that all of them seem to integrate English in some way or another. Whether we are talking about science, finance, business, the English language is the backbone. In his article, Ethan Zuckerman describes a unique relationship between countries that primarily exchange information and the serious lack or dark spots in the world where we don't hear much from anyone. He admits that his own nonprofit, which is a website based on bringing global news into developed countries from underdeveloped countries, he admits that he hasn't had much success. And that's not really a surprise to me because of the technological giants that he's going up against. It's very hard to go up against somebody like Facebook or Twitter and bring information in from outside sources, especially when our information is being highly focused from a certain technological strangle point like Facebook. And so the idea is I'm monolingual. How am I supposed to understand anyone else? And that's where the English language comes in. And maybe that's the reason why English is quickly spreading and it's becoming a global language. Because we can connect in commonality, and although it possibly is destroying some other language, is it the best for the globe for everyone to be able to communicate via one common language? Okay, so as you can see from this airline popularity map, he suggests that the darker countries, he being Ethan Zuckerman, suggests that the darker countries are where language could be a major obstacle. Most of the highlighted areas either have English as a native language or they study English as a second language. Those two red arrows point to China and Japan. And also in India, they study English as a second language feverishly. So the English is a dominant point in all these highlighted maps. Australia, Europe, and the United States all have English ties. Europe, especially in the United Kingdom, in Western Europe, it's all based on the English language. So, um, after careful consideration of Zuckerman's proposal, he uses an example of a Chinese website that needs to be translated. Basically, it's in all Chinese, and he uses an example of Google Translate and how Google Translate can translate any website that is not in English into English. Unfortunately, Google Translate is not the best with the Chinese language, but this is a forming example of what Zuckerman is trying to get at. Our boundaries with other countries it starts with language, and if we can find a common language, I think it will propel globalization and cultural immersion and not hinder it. To get more user friendly, since most sites are in English, now I'm asking you guys, is it wrong to look toward building Chinese website in English or have an English equivalent built in? The question it may upset some people, and I understand that, but is it for the best for the globe? It's a very big question, obviously, and it would probably take a long time to answer. He also talks about extensively about bridge building between cultures, and language obviously is the key. I believe that these bridges are centered on language. Having one common language will not only speed up communication, but it will allow for other countries to develop and mold into a common language juggernaut, for lack of a better term, and take the world by storm. We can connect easier and easier. And at the end of this topic, Zuckerman takes a xenophile approach, and he implores people to become xenophiles, which are people who are attracted to foreign cultures. I think, in essence, we all have a desire to connect with other cultures. And I think the answer is that we already are, and it's growing at a rapid rate. However, the bridges haven't been built for poorer countries with less infrastructure, less global presence, less technological advancement. And in this respect, we have a lot of work to do. Globalization is zipping past these countries and leaving them in the dark. But language is the key to lighting them up. Thank you.